What is up, grinders? Welcome to another episode of the MMA Crunch Time Before Lock. I'm here with my friend Squirrel Patrol. Squirrel, mixed bag, man. This is an ugly, ugly one, but I've got to kick it off and say, man, this is a card to get wild on. That is what this card is.
Yeah, I actually agree. It's a card that I first looked at and can't wait till like UFC 294. But it's kind of grown on me the more I've looked at it because you have like the Terrence McKinney fight and that clearly stands out above the rest. But I mean, it's price wise too, right? He's 9,500. He's got like a 2/3 chance of a first round finish. And then you've just got a bunch of very very similar fights, and then the main event is also kind of in that group of similar fights, just gonna have the potential to go 5 rounds. But that actually makes things really interesting because you're seeing like ownership gaps or like ownership kind of above or below certain places that I think it makes sense when you dig into it. But maybe we want to take advantage of that because like maybe the ownership is higher or lower than it should be.
Yeah, and I think this card, like you said, has so many dynamics. Usually you can pinpoint and point to one thing on a card. Like this could be a deciding factor. This could be, multiple things like volatile fights. But this card literally has everything. And I think almost everybody's in play. Would you agree with that? I mean, there's some shot people. There's some people that haven't fought in a while. I mean, I think there's two people that are particularly shot and might give up a lot of points. I don't know if you know who I'm talking about, but he might have a tattoo on his chest.
Yeah. So I completely agree. It's interesting because a lot of times I'll look at a fight card and it's like, oh, here's a bunch of like fighters, and I'm like anxious to put in my lineups, and then I start like playing around with like ownership or projections or whatever. It's like, it's actually I have a hard time getting these guys out of my lineups because I think they've got such a good chance for success. Here, I look at the card and don't like anybody, but that makes it more fun because you can make like kind of whatever lineup you want, and it's got about the same expected outcome. That actually kind of makes it a little bit more fun.
It does, 100%. And whenever there's a Terrence McKinney on the card, you know it's going to be fun. We almost had two Terrence McKinney molds. We had Terrence McKinney himself, and we were going to have Daniel Lacerda, da Silva. That fight actually falling off saved me a ton of money. I would have been on Da Silva. I would have had to be. I mean, people wouldn't ever want to go there. But
he's going to end up being like the longest tenured fighter in the UFC 5 years from now without having fought yet.
So no wins. The guy I think has the no contest, but yeah, we'll see what ends up happening there. I mean, I guess it has to be the starting point. Terrence McKinney, when he fights, he can put up 120 plus points on a given time, and quick win bonus firmly in play here. But when he loses, I'm staring at single digit ownership. Devin, highlight that. Brendan Marat, single digit. How are you handling this? I almost look at it as a once in a lifetime opportunity just because I'm kind of team anti fade Terrence McKinney because he comes out so hot because he can give up so many points down the stretch. And 6,700, imagine what you can do with your lineups. And then, I mean, even uniqueness, if he's going to be single digit, you don't need to get too crazy after that.
Right. I think his ownership might be higher, but I hope not. Because he's got about a 20% chance of winning the fight. And I think the last few times we've done the show, I've said, well, it's still not that high, and you can lose a lot of money chasing those, biggest underdogs on the slate. But we've had 2 cards in a row now where the biggest underdog on the slate has won, and ended up on the optimal lineup of like the biggest contest out there. So yeah, I think because of that, I think Marat might end up a little bit higher owned, just because of Brundage and Bobby Green, winning the last 2 cards. It's actually been like mid-September since we had a card where the biggest underdog didn't win. But I hope Marat comes in at like single digit ownership because I'll probably try to be double or maybe even triple that. But I'm not going to be underweight McKinney either. I think you need to have about 80% of this fight in your lineups and just hope that you don't see a cancellation. Or the other way this fight fails is maybe McKinney gets a like early second round finish where he's where he puts up like 80 something points and doesn't end up on the optimal lineup. But like that's a small chance. Like the chance of a cancellation is almost that high. So I'm going to probably own this fight about the 80% mark.
A minute and 1 second is how it busts.
Yeah.
Seriously, you want him to get like a 4.5 minute first round. That's optimal for McKinney, because I think even the quick win with it being in play is there, but we often look at fighters and he's chasing the finish pillar to post at least. So he's a prototypical guy I like to get behind. You like to get behind, I'm sure, long term. But I mean, it's easy to go overweight on a guy like Murat. And I think Murat's such an unknown, right? He's from my region up here in Boston. A lot of tough guys out of here. I know nothing about him. I've heard of a lot of people. I never heard of this kid, Squirrel. So that's a little bit of a concern. But I mean, it's hard to ignore the ownerships. That's why I kind of made it my first point.
Yeah. I mean, so Murat, I mean, about 20% chance of winning the fight is not zero, as we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And like Vegas is not giving this money out for free. It's not like he's a 1 in 1,000 shots, you know, and they're giving you 4 to 1 or whatever it is. You know, it is about a 20% chance probably. So he should not be like 5% or 7% owned or whatever it's going to end up being. Like he should be about 20-something% owned. So yeah, I think we'll be on the same page there. Right. And like, I don't think like fading McKinney is a great idea. He is expensive, so he could get priced off the winning lineup even in a win. But it's that 2/3 chance of a first round finish that makes it a scary fade, and why I'm not going to look to be under the field on him.
100% makes sense. We another point that I would go when I'm starting to build my lineups is right to the Yanez and Martinez, because the finish equity is firmly there. The prices are 100% right there. I think somebody could score a bunch in the first round, but I think the equity in this fight completely drops off after that. Squirrel, what are your thoughts on this one? Because I think decision making, you're having almost 60% in the field right in this range. Well, with these two guys, I think there's an opportunity that Yanez is going to be very, very popular. You might have some leverage with the Martinez type of play, but I don't know how you're going to handle it. Like I'd rather follow you. Lead me to the promised land.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any reason to fade this fight, and I think it's a difficult fight. Maybe if you're hand building, like you're maybe more likely to go stars and scrubs, because I think you'll probably have a lot of people that click on McKinney first, and then they might want to avoid the uncertainty of this fight, but it has a decent chance of putting up a high score. So I think you've got to just probably pick somebody from this fight more often than not. I don't, similar to Vegas, I don't have a clear indication of who's going to put up the higher score or who's going to win. I think Yanez maybe has a better chance of scoring well, but it's slight. And I think it's reflected in ownership, where these guys are owned at about the same clip, maybe with Yanez a little bit higher. But like that's not an ownership situation I'm looking to take advantage of. And also, Yanez is more expensive, which I think could flip the ownership, I think, more than we're seeing projected there. Because I think people might just see, hey, it's 50-50 fight. I save like $200 or whatever on Martinez, and he might end up being a higher owned one there. And if that's the case, I'd end up overweight on Yanez.
I'll tell you why I brought it up is because I'm more apt to probably just fade that fight and pray it gets like a third round finish, like a crappy kickboxing 3-round. Problem is both guys have been finished in the UFC. Yanez just last time out after a huge step up in competition. So that's why I think that, it's somewhat of an important fight. And I mean, there's no more important fight than the main event. You alluded to it right off the bat, John. I shake my head, because if this thing ends up being strictly kickboxing and it's a third, fourth round finish, it might not get there. I'd struggle to see it, because I think there will be a pace out there, but there's a world where it busts. I just understand that you can comfortably get one of these guys into your lineups. That's the problem.
Yeah, because it's priced kind of in the mid range. I might end up under the field on it, and not dramatically under the field. It's just that it is, I think it's negative odds to go to, minus odds to go over 2.5 rounds. Or sorry. Yeah, to go over 2.5 rounds, and minus odds to go under 3.5. So they are kind of on average expecting this to go about 2.5 to 3.5 rounds. That's kind of the worst case scenario for a main event fight, because then it's just like any other fight. Yeah, I don't know. I might end up under the field, just because if you look at this as just a 3-round fight, you wouldn't necessarily be going out of your way to play it. And it's like they're decent scorers, but they're not super high pace, like Max Holloway or something, where it's like, oh, like this, Marab, where it's going to be like, oh, no matter when this ends, they're going to end up on the optimal lineup. So yeah, I might end up like kind of unintentionally slightly under the field on this fight, just because I do think it's a way to get your lineups a little bit different. Like if you looked at this as a 3-round fight, which it might end up being more so than other main events, if you looked at it as a 3-round fight, these guys are too highly owned for that fight.
I think you and I are on the same page sniffing this card out, because those are the two fights, those last two there, that, I mean, I'm not thrilled about going underweight to these two, the main event and then Yanez Martinez, but I feel like I'm just doing it to try to differentiate. There's a lot of action fights on this card. What's your favorite action fight outside of that McKinney fight? Because I think the women's fights can actually be sneaky, and there's a fight on here that's just, there's two fights, let me tell you, that I personally think are fadeable anytime they fight. Ducote, Yoder, Gutierrez, Alatang. Gutierrez is the guy I'm fading long-term. The guy just doesn't no fantasy output at all. And then Ducote, another one, just doesn't score well. But my problem in that fight is that I think Yoder's shot. I think she's older, long in the tooth. I think there's a path that, Ducote actually could finish a decent betting line inside the distance there, but Gutierrez could also finish. Like, that problem is anybody could score a ton of points on this slate. I'm just trying to sniff out the potential ones that might not score well. So what's your favorite fight? And then we can kind of break down those two ones that I think are kind of frustrating, the Ducote and Gutierrez.
So favorite fight might actually be Petrosky. Because I think I don't see like why he's seeing such low ownership. Well, like when I started digging into it, I didn't see why he was seeing such low ownership. And then it actually started to make sense to me. He's got like worse odds than like Irina. And so that's kind of dictating ownership. But I think he's like the exact same price. They're both at like 7,600. Andre Petrosky and Irina Alekseeva. But like, I think Petrosky's going to score much better in a finish, like in a fight. Like I think, or in a win. I think he's going to like potentially outscore Irina. It's like the ownership there should be flipped, but it's not. So that's something I'm looking to take advantage of, because I think Petrosky is going to go like way under owned. Like if you lined these fighters up if you lined the winners up at the end of the night, who's going to be the highest scoring? Like there's no reason to think Andre Petrosky would be off that list in a win. And I think you'll get like some decent leverage there, because I think Pereira is going to be like 40% or so owned.
Wow.
So like you're getting a decent amount of leverage, and it's also like kind of flipping. Like a lot of people are just going to be clicking on Irina because she's got the better win odds. So that like the Petrosky Pereira fight might be my favorite.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that women's fight scares the hell out of me. There's two somewhat unknown commodities still. Alekseeva had one fight in the UFC. She finished. She's going to get some love because of that, because she's already made the walk. But I could see that fight being a bust, because they just negate. If they end up both being the grapplers, they both end up kickboxing. Hell, there's a world where they both one wins one round, the other one wins the second round, and then they just kill off the fantasy upside. So I 100% understand that. And that's why this particular card is very interesting, because people are going to be drawn into money line. And then they're just not looking at the upside. Petrosky, man, this guy, he's going to grapple. He stays to a game plan, and he doesn't want to be at distance against Pereira. Like you said, he could get clipped, could get hurt. I think there's a fight here, Viviane Araújo and Maia. That's another one that groups into the Ducote and Gutierrez mold. Maia just doesn't score at all, ever, never. And you know what? Araújo doesn't either. I don't know how this spikes gets there. I don't know. They'd have to be grappling, right?
Yeah, I could see this fight being pretty low scoring. And I think they're like a little bit bigger names, relative to everybody else on this card. It's the co-main event. So I think people might go there just out of name recognition. And that's great, because I'm probably going to end up under the field or look to be under the field there, just because I agree. Like they're probably two of the better fighters in terms of like UFC resume on the card, and that's giving them like the co-main event status. But that doesn't like translate to fantasy points. So, if people are clicking there just because they recognize the names, like this could go to a low-paced 3-round decision. Like it seems like a good fight to be under the field on. Like you've got to be under the field somewhere if you're going to be over the field other places. That second to last fight of the night looks like one of the places I might end up under the field.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned Alexeyeva right there, Petrosky, then you can go up from there. So it's very difficult to get her to Araujo. I think that there's some win equity because every single one of Jennifer Maia's fights are pretty close, Squirrel. So if I'm looking for winners, maybe there's potentially some equity on the side of Araujo. But yeah, I mean, we haven't even hit on one of my favorites. And I mean, I think this is an X Factor fight. Tainara Lisboa, Oliveira, Ravina. Oliveira. This is like the most unknown fight I've seen in a long time because Lisboa did dominate Jess Clark, which, I mean, she kind of fizzled out in the UFC. She did what she needed to against her, took her out of there. But this is just like, how can you get behind a 72% money line equity for women's MMA that's going to be pretty damn ugly? That's the terrifying thing because I feel like this is the classic women's MMA where unknown Brazilian prospect X can take out anybody in the UFC. We don't know what Oliveira is as a commodity.
Yeah, I agree. I will probably end up over the field on this fight. Lisboa actually has the second best first round finish odds on the slate after Terrence McKinney. And I don't think people would necessarily think that. And so I think she might end up being a little bit underowned, and especially because she's 9,400. That it's going to be different. People are just going to click on Terrence McKinney and then think, okay, now I need to save some money. So they're going to skip over Lisboa. I might end up with Lisboa or McKinney on every single lineup, and I will actually try to get both of them on some lineups and just see where that leaves me in terms of salary. Because you can do it. It's just maybe not a comfortable click, but that's good, right? That's maybe giving us more unique lineups or more differentiation in our lineups. I don't know if Lisboa will be 36% owned or 35% owned.
It's going to be lower. Nobody was going to have any confidence going to women's MMA because think about it. You can go down to the main event there, YUSUFF. You can get a Pereira. That's the range, right? Brown, we haven't talked about. We'll talk in a minute. I agree with you. I think she comes in lower than 36. That's way too high. The problem is people are drawn into -115, minus whatever inside the distance.
Yeah, I think Chris Gutierrez is going to end up higher owned than Lisboa because I think people are going to recognize the name. I was struggling to think of who she was. She just fought in May and won her debut. I'm sure I watched that card. I don't remember it. I don't remember her. And so you're just not looking at her and thinking oh, that's the second best first round finish odds on the card. You would think that's going to belong to Pereira or Gutierrez. Or Cameron Simon, Simon, you're not thinking that that's Tainara Lisboa, so I don't think she's going to see 35% ownership. That maybe that's more what her ownership should be, and not what it's going to actually end up being.
Yeah, 100%. I think you and I continue to be on the same train here. I look forward to one more fight to have your opinion on, but this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you bet $5 for new users in, here we go, Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. And I am using my bets long-term to get those big numbers in between live bets. I'm betting against Terrence McKinney. After the first round, we're gonna have what'll Marotti be? He'll be plus 1,200. I mean, there will be a massive number, and that's a shot taking that I like long term. Using a freebie type of bet there. But I really alluded before that read that there's a fight I need your opinion on. And it's Cameron Simon versus Christian Rodriguez. I shake my head after the weight miss. I almost wanted to cry because I knew the weight miss means more love for C-Rod. I knew that's what would gonna have to happen. And I understand why people are getting behind him, but Simon long term was one of these guys I wanted to be targeting. And I think his fights will constantly have action, but this is one of those ones where I'm cautiously optimistic. It's this guy has been facing absolute nobodies in the UFC. And Rodriguez just exposed like the world's best prospect in Rosa.
Yeah.
Like there's a world though where this fight busts. That's why I left it to the last one for us to break down as a macro, because two prospects shooting up the rankings, you rarely see. Like, I don't think Rodriguez is the biggest prospect in the world. I actually thought highly of Simon. They sometimes just stalemate. You know what I mean, Squirrel? And then there's just nothing to be had here. I just think pace of fight, though, it's hard to ignore.
Yeah, I agree. And this actually kind of fits in with the Petrosky Pereira fight along the same mold, that I think it's going to go under owned because there's other fighters with like better win equity in the same price range. So like I think Cameron Simon's losing some ownership to like Vivian Arojal, and I'd much rather pick like Cameron Simon, especially if he's going to be lower owned, because like he has shown the ability to put up like points in UFC fights in the past. And not necessarily even like first round, like anybody, like Liam says, like anybody can slip on a banana peel, right? And then the opposing fighter is getting 100 points in the first round. But like only certain fighters fight a style that can put up 100 points in like a 3-round decision. And Cameron Simon's done that, so that's why I'm going to probably end up over the field on him. I don't mind going to the Christian Rodriguez side. I just think more people are going to go there. I think he's going to see higher ownership. And like, yeah, his big like fight is that Raul Rosas fight, which he was not expected to win, but he did. But he only put up 70 points. And that was
no
the more expensive.
Remember?
Yeah.
We love the pitter patter. Play the bongos when you're in top position or you're controlling, because he's more submission over or control over submission rather, right? So like he's not actually looking to finish at a high rate, where I think Simon, that guy's going to go in there and try to finish every single second.
Yeah, exactly. Isn't Simon the guy that always gets fouls? Like he always
that would be the other bet I do. You know, there's probably a decent number, you know, for a point to be deducted. This would be the spot. Yeah, Simon obviously grabs the cage, eye pokes. Yeah. He's very green. Very, very green.
Yeah, we'll see. Like it's unlikely to actually happen. Like some of the fouls haven't been blamed. You know, they've just been enough to get a point deducted or whatever. So hopefully that doesn't happen. But yeah, I'll probably be over the field on Cameron Simon. Not necessarily looking to get under the field on Christian Rodriguez, but he's not a guy I like feel the need to force into my lineup.
No, that's the problem with him. Is like I feel like at 8,400, I almost wish he was like 9K, so I'd have to make a decision on him. You know what I'm saying? Like he's almost like too cheap, because if he's going to expose a kid like Simon, he might just get him out of there. Like you said, slip on a banana peel, something like that. So your builds, what are they going to look like? Like I'm starting to see with our conversation, it's going to be looking, you know, from Martinez down to Petrosky type of builds. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, I'm going to try to be over the field on like the underdogs that I think will put up a good score in a win. And then it goes from like Petrosky, like Marat, like fits that category. He's only going to win 1 out of every 5 or so times. So I'm going to be trying to be over the field on those underdogs. Oliveira is somebody that's interesting too at 6,800. Like I much prefer Marat and Oliveira to Yoder. Like I'm probably setting myself up here, but I think like Oliveira is at least unknown. Whereas like I have a hard time seeing Yoder winning.
Grapples. Spider Monkey, man. She could get the control time. That's really the only narrative that you can really go off of, right?
Yeah, I agree. The age though bothers me, and actually, I think another fight we didn't mention, the TJ Brown like Darren Elkins fight.
That's why I waited.
Yeah, we've seen like some of the older fighters win like this past summer. Like I don't know, long-term trends though. Like you don't want to be clicking these fighters are like 39 years old, because it tends to not go well as it's like running backs in their late 20s. As they hit that 30-year-old mark, fighters in their late 30s as they approach 40, it becomes much easier to get them out of there inside the distance. So I think Elkins will end up being somewhat popular as an underdog. Yep. I'm not going to try to like completely fade him, but I probably want to be more on the TJ Brown side.
I don't even think he's like necessarily a first round type of guy either. Elkins is a guy that will survive, take somebody out deeper. So there's even a path that he doesn't very much score well because he's on bottom. I mean, I expect takedowns from Brown. I think Brown, I think in the expert survey I said it's Terrence McKinney. You have to say he's going to be the highest scorer because that's Terrence McKinney. But sneaky upside GPP play, TJ Brown does a little bit of scoring everywhere for you. He will go for takedowns, 3.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. Pretty damn good. Output decent, almost 4 significant strikes per minute out there. And Elgin Sneaky doesn't have the best takedown defense. He's only got 58%. I mean, the thinking, I think, is that Elkins is going to implement takedowns. And I don't know if he wants to do that because TJ Brown actually reverses people, Squirrel. I look for the little hidden stats for DFS wise. That's a stat that scores you 6 points every time you get a reverse. Now, you don't want to be on bottom, let's be honest, right? Yeah. But hidden scoring is always sometimes a good thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, and it's true. Like the thing with Elkins is it's difficult to get him out of there. And he's kind of relentless, but like maybe that's a good thing for his opponent scoring, right? Like if TJ Brown, so maybe that's a situation where TJ Brown doesn't have to get it finished. Like on a card where not a lot of people have like this high finishing upside outside of Terrence McKinney, like what you want to be looking for then is guys who are gonna, or ladies who are gonna put up a high score in a decision, in a 3-round decision. And I think TJ Brown does fit that mold. Like I'm not, and maybe this is a fight that I look to be over the field on both, on both Brown and Elkins. But if I have to choose one or the other to be over the field on, it would probably be TJ Brown.
Yeah, and we will definitely tweet anything out if there's any late notice. We have about 30 minutes left here. The show winding down. Contests aren't there's a little bit of overlay, a little bit of stuff to enter out there. So, I think seriously, this is a card you can go a little bit wild. Salary does not matter. If you're going to be up and spending 50K, know that you're probably going to be duped to the gills. This is one where you can kind of take 3 underdog type approach. I really do think that. Now, final takeaways from you, Squirrel, before we get out of here.
No, just I hope the Terrence McKinney fight doesn't get canceled. like whenever that happens in one card, it's like it's almost like trauma. You're worried it's going to happen the next card, or the card after that. Because I think I'm going to be over that field on that fight, and I think everybody listening to the show should be over the field on the fight because it's going to be a very difficult situation to see that fight not ending up on the winning lineup, whoever wins. So I'll probably own it at about 80% clip.
11 fights. I mean, it's hard to ignore. Once you even get to 12 is really the number where I think things start changing. Speaking of more fights, next week, a lot of switch ups, a lot of change ups. We have Makhachev versus Volkanovski 2, but the title fight, only 1 5-round fight, disappointing, but 13 fights. So let's hope that holds true. I heard the rumblings. Did you hear the rumblings? Val, the guy that filled in for Bo Nickel last time, that poor guy that got slaughtered, he might be coming onto this card replacing Johnny Walker. There's betting lines out there already. I'm like, oh no, that poor guy is going to be a legend of getting slaughtered into the UFC. Poor guy.
Oh yeah, he'd have to face Ankalaev.
Yeah.
Like I thought he looked decent against Nickel. For however long the fight lasted. But we'll see. That guy maybe needs to make a different choices.
Abu Dhabi type of card, home cooking. Here though, the Apex, a lot of scoring on this slate. Make sure to follow us on Twitter, and we will see you guys next week.